Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has apparently made a strategic decision to bury the hatchet and normalize Turkey's relations with Israel. For the last several months, there have been small and symbolic signs of Erdogan's willingness to chart a new course with the Bennett government after a dozen years of tension with the one headed by Netanyahu. There were phone calls with senior Israeli officials. Erdogan praised Bennett's positive attitude, and his foreign minister, Mevlut Cavusoglu, wished his Israeli counterpart Yair Lapid a speedy recovery from a light case of COVID-19. When and how will substance follow style? To analyze it, joining us all the way from Istanbul, Turkey, is former U.S. Ambassador Matthew Bryza, who is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you. Honored to be with you.
Indeed, absolutely. Also joining us from Central Israel is Dr. Eytan Cohen Yanarocak, who is a research fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, as well as the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University. Thank you for joining us as well, sir.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you indeed. And with us here in the studio is our TV7 editor-at-large and host of Watchmen Talk, Powers in Play, and so much more, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, give us a broader understanding on the latest state of play in Ankara-Jerusalem relations.
So Erdogan has apparently already built a verbal bridge across the Mediterranean. And what we are waiting to see is who is going to step on it. Is it going to be Israeli President Herzog? He would be a natural candidate. He was the first one to exchange pleasantries with Erdogan. Is it going to be Foreign Minister Lapid? Not very likely, because he was initially cool towards the Turkish overture. And we will have to see when Prime Minister Bennett, who is really Erdogan's counterpart right now, whether he can meet with Erdogan, and whether the Israeli cabinet will at any time convene to decide what is Israel's not only Turkish policy, but East Mediterranean policy. Because obviously, for the last 20 years, since relations with Turkey have cooled, Israel has cultivated new friends. And there is a new reality energy-wise and strategy-wise, and Israel has moved from the European command to the Central Command. It doesn't really need Turkish consent for several of its military activities. So we will have to see whether the warming of atmosphere is going to be followed by some concrete moves.
Indeed. And I think it's also important to highlight the fact that there's another factor in play. Azerbaijan, President Aliyev has brought up this matter of trying to seek rapprochement between Turkey and Israel, two of his closest allies, of course, in the region. And therefore, I'd like to start by asking you, Ambassador Bryza, when we're talking about Azerbaijan, a country that you were the ambassador of the United States to, it is a country that really sees the benefit of seeing Turkey and Israel reproach to one another. Do you really see this as a viable reality, however, with regard to recent years being quite stringent when we're talking about the political front, at least?
Well, I certainly believe there's a sincere desire by President Aliyev to play that role of brokering rapprochement between Israel and Turkey. And that's absolutely rational from Azerbaijan's perspective for two reasons. One, Israel buys most of its oil from Azerbaijan through the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline. So that's a pipeline that we know goes from the Caspian Sea in the city of Baku to Tbilisi, Georgia, then into Turkey to the city of Ceyhan on the Caspian. So there's an underlying strategic economic tie binding Azerbaijan to Turkey and Israel. But then, of course, there's the issue of the 44-day war between September and November of 2020. When Azerbaijan's two most important partners by far were Turkey and Israel in terms of drone technology, both countries' drones, meaning both Turkey's and Israel's, as well as Turkey's innovative tactics that allowed for really a breathtakingly quick and decisive offensive by the Azerbaijani forces to destroy advanced weapons that are Russian weaponry, basically, that were in Armenia's arsenals. So there's a reason for Azerbaijan to want to bring the countries together. Turkey has gone through a big geopolitical shift since the end of the Trump administration and the Abraham Accords. Turkey saw the writing on the wall. It saw that there could be a big shift then away from Washington's high pressure tactics on Iran, but also new openings to Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and why not Israel, I think, was the view in Turkey. And finally, I think Turkey wants to de-isolate itself in the Eastern Mediterranean on energy issues. So from the Azerbaijan side and the Turkey side, there is a sincere desire to move forward. The question is, as we were just hearing, what is the situation in Israel? How realistic are Israeli coalition politics to want to embrace that opening? And I defer to my Israeli colleagues on this panel who know infinitely more than I about that.
Indeed. Dr. Cohen, Yanarocak, your take?
Well, I also agree with Mr. Braiza that Azerbaijan can act as a mediator between Israel and Turkey. When we are looking at the map in Caucasia, we do see that Azerbaijan can be considered as a good partner of the state of Israel, not only in terms of energy, but also when we are looking at Azerbaijan's location. We see that it's crucial for the state of Israel because of its proximity to Iran. And when we are looking at the Armenian-Israeli relations, we do see that Armenia is pretty much in the hands of Russia and Iran. It's very much dependent to these two states. That's why this fact makes Azerbaijan Israel's natural ally. And when we are seeing this equation, I also believe that the Israeli government also sees this opportunity. From the beginning, Israel sees Turkey as an important strategic asset. And of course, we would like to normalize our relations with Turkey. But now we have a new equation, a new fact on the ground, which is called the Abraham Accords in the Middle East. Israel is not the same isolated country anymore. And besides Azerbaijan, we also have new friends in the neighborhood. These are, of course, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and of course, everything could be possible thanks to the silent approval of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So given this fact on the ground, Israel's hands now are stronger vis-a-vis Turkey. And unlike the past, the decision makers in Jerusalem are not running to the arms of the Turkish decision makers whenever they want it. So now, in the current circumstances, Israel is interested in a genuine normalization with Turkey, which basically pushes Turkey to take very significant decisions. And from my perspective, the first and the foremost is that Turkey should basically keep itself distant from the Hamas terrorist organization. In this regard, Israel cannot make any concessions on that matter, and I believe Azerbaijan will be an important actor in order to persuade the Turkish decision makers to see the broader picture. This will be also a win-win situation for the Turks and Azeris. I believe that it will contribute to both countries' reputation in the United States when we are considering the Israel lobby's strength at the Washington, D.C.
Indeed. Mr. Owen, I'd like to quote a former Israeli prime minister and defense minister, if you will, and IDF chief of general staff, Mr. Ehud Barak, who said one thing about Israel being a villa in the jungle. And the second thing, it's better to be wise than right. Where does Israel stand in this situation? Because obviously, when we're talking about being right or wanting a genuine relationship where the feelings are still hurt, but we want the other side to make that special overture of asking for forgiveness. Is this now a place in which the Middle East, which is tumultuous as it is, with the Islamic Republic being cited correctly as a destabilizing factor, not only for Israel and not only for Israeli interests in the region, but also those of Turkey, which also regards Tehran and the Islamic Republic in particular as quite a challenge? Is this a time to be picky about how we play geopolitics in this region?
The founding fathers of Israel had some fond and some not so fond memories of the Ottoman legacy. And of course, Ben-Gurion and Sharet and Ben-Zvi and others went to Istanbul to study, and Ben-Gurion actually hoped to become a member of parliament and the minister representing the Jewish community. And even later, they considered Turkey a regional power and admired Ataturk. Now, this is long gone. And after the Israeli independence, Israel's main strategic interest with Turkey was as a pincer movement against Syria. Syria being a common enemy and a common neighbor. Now, right now, the interests are different. And while Israel would like to have cordial relations with Turkey, it is true, as Eytan said, that Hamas is the wild card. And this is because if there is a flare-up in Gaza, it is not so certain that Turkey can just look aside. It is beholden ideologically to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, of which Hamas is an offshoot, and the deterioration in Turkish-Israeli relations really started in late 2008 and early 2009 after Operation Cast Lead in Gaza and the Gladstone report. So if there is a period of lull in the Israeli-Hamas relations, fine. If Israel invests in the welfare of the population in Gaza, even better. But if there is another periodic clash between Israel and Hamas, what we talked about up to now may be spoiled again.
Indeed. Dr. Breiza?
Hamas is important for the ruling AKP, the political party here in Turkey. And when I was, I had the honor to oversee U.S.-Turkey relations during my last 4 years in Washington at the State Department. And that was a sore point in U.S.-Turkey relations as well. And no matter how much we argue that Hamas is a terrorist organization and that hosting meetings in Turkey of the Hamas leadership, whether it's the militant arm or militarized arm or not, is a huge problem for U.S.-Turkey relations. But it didn't matter. And so, there are, I think from Turkey's perspective, the government and certainly the president is looking for more of a transactional relationship at this point with Israel. All of those problems of being a supporter of or partner of Hamas and a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood, those run deep. Those run deeply. Now, I wouldn't say that this Turkish government is as Islamist in its objectives as earlier. I think this government has evolved and its leaders have evolved over the course of the past 20 years and become much more pragmatic and much more concerned about power, raw power, hanging on to it, and more traditional foreign policy with, good relations with Turkic peoples in Central Asia and the Caucasus, replacing the neo-Ottomanism that we were hearing about at the beginning of this government's rule, especially when Ahmet Davutoğlu was the foreign minister and then prime minister. Nonetheless, so Turkey is looking for more of a transactional relationship. So I think Erdogan is thinking, even after the Mavi Marmara incident in 2010, in June of 2010, when there was a raid, as we all know, on the Turkish ship, the Mavi Marmara, that was trying to break into Gaza, basically. Even after that, Turkish-Israeli trade blossomed and increased twofold, even threefold. So I think Erdogan is thinking, let's get back on track with economic relations. I think he believes that the most logical export route for gas from Leviathan is Turkey, because Turkey has the largest natural gas market in this region, meaning not just the Middle East, but Southeast Europe. Turkey is a connecting point to Greece and the EU with pipelines already. And the most economically feasible and profitable way to export that Leviathan gas would be to and through Turkey, notwithstanding a pipeline to Egypt and liquefying that gas to put it on tankers to send around the world. Whereas what Israel seems to care more about is more strategic and more fundamental, which is Turkey giving up this cozy relationship with Islamists, whether it be Hamas in particular or the Muslim Brotherhood.
Indeed. Dr. Cohen, Yanarocak, do you see also, let's take one individual's of the list of individuals that Turkey is hosting, the founder of the Izz-al-Din al-Qassam Brigades, which is the military arm of the Islamist Hamas organization in Gaza. He is currently residing in Turkey. If Turkey were, for instance, to take that specific individual and transfer him to Qatar, also a country that has very close relations with Hamas and also at the behest of Israel, so to speak, even though not having direct relations with Israel, is assisting the Palestinian enclave for humanitarian reasons, and is doing so in a verifiable manner to ensure that it's not falling into the wrong hands. Do you see that specific move of such an individual as a sign, so to speak, of goodwill from the Turkish side that may then create a certain effect from Israeli perspectives to then approach and make those same overtures from Jerusalem in the direction of Ankara?
Well, it could be understood, it could be perceived as a good sign. Last December, Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid made a very important statement after the Israel Defense Forces operation in the West Bank, where 50 Palestinian Hamas terrorists were detained. He said that these 50 terrorists were taken their orders from Hamas's Istanbul cell. And he also mentioned that in order to normalize the relations with Turkey, Turkey should get rid of Hamas immediately. So from my perspective, I really don't think that only one person or two persons should be sacked out from the country, but the entire cell should be dismantled. And besides that, when we are looking at the bigger picture, Ambassador Braiza already mentioned regarding the energy dimension. Recently, the United States made a very important statement that they are not going to support the Middle East pipeline, the EastMed pipeline anymore. And as a result, I think, as they really like to say in Turkey, the timing is very meaningful. This is a Turkish expression, zamanlama manidar in Turkish, that they are using it very frequently. I believe that the current normalization approach, rapprochement, that was conducted from Erdogan's side to our President Herzog, should not be seen as a coincidental. On contrary, the Turkish administration seeks to basically dismantle the Israeli, Greek, and Cypriot alliance in the Eastern Mediterranean, and they are trying to portray the Turkish option as a replacement for the EastMed. I totally agree with Ambassador Braiza that the Turkish option is much more cheaper, feasible, and they already have the necessary infrastructures in the central Anatolia called the TANAP pipeline. I understand, and I totally see that it's something very logical and more logical than the EastMed. But the problem here is the mutual trust between the two states. And I believe we cannot build such a mutual trust in the presence of the Hamas cell within the borders of Turkey. So if we would like to proceed to do something concrete, which will be profitable, which will trigger prosperity for the whole Mediterranean, for the whole Eastern Mediterranean region. So first of all, we should achieve mutual trust. And I also would like to underline here another issue. As we already witnessed that we could not achieve the EastMed pipeline without Turkey. And I believe we will not be achieve such a pipeline without Greece and Cyprus. I think also the Turkish administration should internalize that. Such a regional pipeline should embrace and should be inclusive for all the actors of the region. And besides the sovereignty, I guess the decision makers should solely concentrate on the profit margin of this whole venture. And in my opinion, the sovereignty issue, which is basically constituting the heart of the matter, maybe should be set aside, and with the pragmatism of the decision makers, we can proceed. But frankly, I cannot see that a fragile normalization with Turkey. Israel should not basically sacrifice Greece and Cyprus for the sake of such a fragile normalization. We cannot afford that.
Indeed. However, the question then should arise, does the one come at the expense of the other? When we heard specifically President Recep Tayyip Erdogan last week speak about the potential invitation of, or the invitation of the Israeli President Yitzhak Herzog, whose brother happens to be also the Israeli ambassador to the United States, he also spoke about a win-win formula that should be taken into account. He did raise indeed the pipeline for the Leviathan offshore natural gas reservoir, and that is, of course, a factor that has been already brought up back in 2012 or around that time period in a different construct. But could this also be an approach of the Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2 kind of situation where the Energy Ministry, together with the National Security Council here in Jerusalem, probably already deliberating the pros and cons of being able to utilize two pipelines for the capacity of understanding how to deal with leverage in such a situation?
Yes, but, and the but is what was raised here. Energy security means that even under tense conditions, the other country is not going to change the conditions of operation, that it is left for the corporations, for the market to do it. The American, of course, objection to Nord Stream and part of the tension with Germany over it is that nobody in Washington wants to give Russia a hand on the valve. Because in peacetime there is no problem, but if you can stop the flow of energy, then it's another matter. Now, Israel and Turkey do have one thing in common. Both of these countries...
Just one.
Just one. Both of these countries hold occupied territories. Turkey in Cyprus and Israel in the West Bank, which other countries do not recognize. Now, it doesn't make them natural allies, but they understand the complexities. And in 1994, the Israeli Air Force started deploying to Turkey in order to train in unfamiliar terrain and over long ranges. It stopped under Erdogan, and the Israeli Air Force is not going back there. But on the intelligence front, there is cooperation, for instance, against the PKK terrorists. So there are grounds for optimism, but we will have to see concrete projects before we can bless the renewed relationship.
Indeed. Not to forget, of course, the East Med Forum has always left its door open to potential neighbors within certain circumstances.
Israel is very powerful, but it is beyond its powers to mend the relations between Greece and Turkey. This has been going on for quite some time, and it is not for Israel to try and do it.
Indeed. Well, we only have a little bit over a minute and a half left, and I'd like to ask you, Ambassador Bryza, about the Turkey-Israel rapprochement. Is the United States, as it's been also in the past under the Obama administration, the factor that would ultimately bring about the rapprochement between the two countries?
Not yet. Right now, the Turkish brand, the Turkish government's brand, and even President Erdogan's personal brand is toxic in Washington. President Erdogan, is often lumped into the same category as Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or Viktor Orban as an authoritarian leader who's rolling back democratic transformation and is pursuing unorthodox economic policies. So that's a situation that Erdogan wants to extract himself from, and things are getting better in U.S.-Turkey relations or Turkey-U.S. relations, but still the conventional wisdom in Washington, and I think in the Democratic Party's political circles, is that Turkey is still, it's not clear how reliable Turkey is as an ally. There's a perception, or I would say a misperception, that Turkey is somehow closer to Russia than to NATO, when in fact Turkey is the only NATO member state that has confronted, fought, and killed Russian troops on the battlefield, both in northwest Syria, in Idlib, and in Libya during the course of the last year and a half. So Washington is not going to be the driver of that process of rapprochement between Israel and Turkey yet, but it may. It may if relations continue to evolve between Turkey and Israel on their own.
Well, that's all the time that we have for today, unfortunately, and this is a topic that we'll have to revisit in the near future. But I'd like to thank Ambassador Bryza and Dr. Cohen Yanarocak, as well as Mr. Amir Oren, and I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time.